So welcome everyone to the second talk of our 3-day Circle of the Way retreat. Newcomers to Mountain Cloud often ask what this community is like. The word that springs to mind first is welcoming. And then open, committed, generously responsive. The first time I spoke at Mount Cloud almost 2 years ago now, I was surprised by the energy in the room, a wonder, the immediacy of listening, hearing, receiving, giving, rather like moo, where I might have imagined a barrier. None. No boundary. In his commentary on that first koan, Mu, springing from his own experience, Mumon says the ancestors set up the barrier of Mu. Our abbot of Sambo Zen, Ryon Roshi, respectfully disagrees. The ancestors didn't set up that barrier, he says. We do. Our sense of separation that we set up and defend and then project onto Mu. If there's any barrier, it's because we put it there. Mu, you. There's no barrier, no border. We need to pass through, so to speak, only to see for ourselves this barrierless barrier, borderless border, gateless gate, or as David Hinton puts it, no gate, gateway. When we see, sometimes even a glimpse, the circle of the way, our life, our practice, the wide, wide world, one entirety without the slightest gap. It's home. And we've been there all along. Right here. The beauty of this freedom and compassion, the empty circle infinitely unfolding, is expressed in a living way every time there's a talk or a retreat at Mountain Cloud. I mean, of course, that's what we're doing here, this practice realizing, embodying. But it's preceded by a quiet gesture, a fresh surprise each time. Some of you know this. Margie sends flowers. Often when Henry's talking we'll see him there, with this bouquet. But with COVID and geographic distance, she creates an arrangement and sends a picture, an image. As we'll see in our koan for today, an image as alive and whole and playful as the Dharma it expresses. This week, the day before the retreat, the arrangement that came was a statue of Buddha and Kannon or Kuan Yin in a lovely alcove. Small, surrounded by carnation blossoms from the flowers that adorned last Saturday's Aloha celebration for Dan. For Dan, Mountain Cloud's just wonderful caretaker who is about to go off on a next adventure in his life. So taken from their stems, the tiny blooms and petals radiating the love of that gathering and blessing ours. Here's don't know if you can see, but circle of the way with great thanks. Thanks all around. The circle showed itself in another way on Wednesday, which happened to be the arrival of the full moon. My partner and I went for a walk early in the morning, that sliver of time when the night sky is waning and the morning light rises in colors before giving way to the sun. That morning, a student sent a photo of the moon. It was from the previous weekend, taken at the end of a long day's drive. Here's what she wrote. I'm sending a photo that I took from the car last weekend. We had been driving all day, but couldn't bear to be inside the motel room while there was still light. It doesn't look like much, but it was such a beautiful moment. The moon was so white, the whitest, chalkiest white, not touched at all by any of the dust below. It seemed to be waiting in the wings while the sun, still with the spotlight, had to have a few more minutes with this dust. One more touch of glowing rose, of blue, until it gave up and turned it over to the moon. The words convey the image. The not quite full moon up in the corner over the desert at sunset. As I read this now, that image of the moon and the dust everywhere that somehow doesn't mar it, doesn't touch it. Such a beautiful pointer to our practice, to this world. The moon, like the Japanese enso, is an image of the circle of the way. Got several artists at Mountain Cloud who, again and again paint these enzos. Enso. Each one unique. Enso simply means circular form, that word. But it's more often rendered in English as Zen circle. From early on in Buddhist tradition, the enso was seen as an image of the moon and of awakening. Sometimes called the bright full moon or a great round mirror. It's said that the great Indian philosopher and became a Zen master in the lineage, Nagarjuna, sometime between the 1st and 3rd century CE. It's said that when he taught, he would appear in his seat as a luminous circle, an image of the true form of Buddha nature. As he put it, neither large nor small, neither wide nor narrow, neither good nor bad, neither transient nor eternal. That circle. Bodhidharma was called great teacher of circle enlightenment. And the 6th patriarch, Huineng or Eno, it's thought that he used 96 types of circles in his teaching. The Shinjin Mei, or verses on trust and mind, describes the way, this way, as a circle like vast space, lacking nothing and nothing in excess. This is about you, this way, Dogen's circle of the way. Between aspiration, practice, awakening, and nirvana, there is not the slightest gap. There just is no gap, no boundary, no border. This circle right here. Showing itself in 10,000 myriad ways, and yet just this. The Chinese Zen master Kyozan, 9th century, is credited with creating the earliest known example of an enso painting. We've seen Kyozan before. At first, a student and Dharma heir of Isan, and then together with Isan, forming the Igyo sect, one of the 5 houses of Zen, one of these 5 schools. So today, on this winding road, this circle, I'd like to look at a koan where Kyozan, the master, and a very adept monk are at play on our behalf, freely using the circle to illumine this world, rather like the moon in all its phases. This is case 77 in the Book of Equanimity, or Shoyoroku. It's called Kyozan as his profession requires. Here's the case. A monk asked Kyozan, "Your Reverence, do you know letters or not?" Kyozan said, "According to my capacity." The monk immediately turned around once clockwise and said, "What letter is this?" Kyozan drew the ideograph for 10 in the earth. The monk turned himself around once counterclockwise and said, "What letter is that?" Kyozan modified the sign into a swastika. It's drawing those lines counterclockwise from each edge. The monk drew a circle in the air and lifted his 2 palms like Asura, vigorously holding the sun and moon, and said, "What letter is that?" Kyozan immediately drew a circle enclosing the swastika. The monk at once represented the vigor of Rusika. Kyozan said, "Good, good. Keep it with care." These encounters in koans are sometimes described as Dharma combat. Who can present this empty, freely functioning world most clearly? Who can embody or express the fact of who we truly are without remain? As the Shinjin Mei put it, a circle like vast space, lacking nothing, nothing in excess. Dharma combat. Here, the exchange is more like a dance, right from the beginning. The first step, the opening question, "Master, do you know letters or not?" Like bowing to him. "Would you like to dance?" I'm curious if the monk knew about Kyozan's renown for calligraphy. "Master, do you know letters or not?" It's a challenge, or maybe a bit of a sheepish question. Either way, there's the circle. Do you know? Kyozan responds, "According to my capacity." It's clever, a perfect fit, and true, as needed, in keeping with my ability. I'm suddenly reminded of this phrase, absolute capacity, infinite possibilities. And here, presented exactly in this way, in keeping with my ability. There's the empty circle, presented to the full. The monk immediately turns around clockwise. What letter is this? We get the drift. Put any letter you want there, and it's 0. Kyozan draws this cross in the ground, the ideograph for 10. Here it is, the fact in its entirety, not just drawn in the earth. It is the earth. How can that be? Empty. The monk turns around in the other direction. What letter is that? If you were here for the yoga this morning, the turning. Kyozan responds immediately in kind. He adds lines to the cross, the 10, turning it into that traditional Chan, good luck or happiness sign. It's called a swastika. Those lines extending counterclockwise. For us, the Nazis distorted and defiled that image. Its near neighbor. They changed it, but it's so close. And that name, swastika. But it survives in its golden meaning in temples across China. I'd actually never seen one used this way, just in my youth and the practice naivete. Walked into the monk's hall at Joshu's temple, and there on the wall behind the dais was this large golden, counterclockwise swastika, radiating. They call it happiness. The monk draws a circle in the air and lifts his palms like the Hindu protector, Asura, vigorously holding the sun and the moon. Circles everywhere, each one alone, whole, and empty. Kyozan immediately draws a circle around the swastika. Starting to get dizzy. But I'm reminded of Kon Roshi's way of presenting this, trying to convey, what is this? That he had this fraction that he developed. And you've heard about it. Or the numerator would be any one of the 10,000 myriad things, any one of you, of us. This iPad, this mat, this book, this computer, that sound, whatever you take up, that alone, this form, this function, the numerator, and underneath the denominator, 0. Just to make it clear that there's not really any line. There's no gap. There aren't two. Kon Roshi would draw a circle around the fraction. There is no other emptiness than this. And whatever you pick up, empty. The case says the monk at once represents the vigor of Rusika. Rusika is a garden deity at the temple gate. Oh, there's kind of a fun story that there were just in this particular era 1,000 Buddhas, and he's the last of the 1,000. He's not very happy about that. And then he realizes that he can become the protector of it all. So he becomes this guardian deity at the temple gate, really fierce. I mean, if you go to temples, the ones, especially the ones I've seen at China, but also Japan, there are these guardian deities at the gate to the temple. But what really is there to guard? There's another koan in the Book of Equanimity, the Shoyoroku. It's called Gokoku's 3 Disgraces. I think it's number 28. 3 disgraces. This master is basically saying, all this Zen, nothing but a disgrace. What are you talking about? The first disgrace, I alone. Just one entirety. He likens it to a crane, a lone crane in a pine tree, It says it's a disgrace when seen from the ground. What an image. This bare, this withered tree, this lone crane. What a disgrace. This ground, our ordinary life. And then the second disgrace, this nothing at all, nothing at all. Sometimes called this frozen world. Not one thing, nada, nada, nada. Gokoku says, sure, but it's a disgrace when the sun comes out. This goneness is useless without compassion, warmth. And then the third disgrace is the temple guardians at either gate, either side of the gate, presumably guarding against the persecution that was going on at the time, Buddhist persecution. Guarding the Dharma. There is nothing outside this Dharma. The persecution itself is the Dharma. Every gesture in this signing, circling dance of Kyozan and the monk is the Dharma. It's all pervading. and it's empty. There's really nothing to guard. I'm feeling grateful for Kon Roshi's fraction, that one circle. The first few lines of Master Bancho's instruction or introduction to the case are telling. Bancho writes, "It is like a person depicting the empty sky." You know, he's pointing to this case, this exchange, this dance. It's like a person depicting the empty sky. The moment one starts to use the brush, one is in the wrong. Think of Dogen, mistake after mistake after mistake. The moment one starts to use the brush. Bancho writes, how could you bear creating a model and making a pattern? How could you bear trying to make something? So he's referring to the case, the model Kyozan and the monk are creating. Creating for us, as though they could convey emptiness, as though they could show nothing. But then Bancho does it too. In the next line of this instruction, he abandons words and simply writes a sign, an empty circle, 0. As far as I know, he does this only here in the instruction for this case. That's the line, the whole line. Just that circle. Yasutani Roshi used to call this koan and many others acrobatics of emptiness. It's our life. Stand up, sit down, turn around, cry, laugh. The slightest gesture. Acrobatics of emptiness. As Bancho put it, it is like a person depicting the empty sky. You can't depict it. You are it. So even those words didn't hold up. Just the circle. 0. It's as if Bancho comes as close as possible to showing that even emptiness is empty. Beyond any conceiving, or as Dogen put it, before knowing. Or as the Heart Sutra puts it, gone, gone, gone beyond, utterly gone. utterly gone. And yet, freely functioning. It evokes wonder, can evoke quiet joy, or maybe an ache in the body, a pain in the heart, a longing to see. Kyozan says, good, good. Keep it with care. How do we do that? Exactly this. The phrase, according to my capacity. Exactly this. The first line of Wanchi's verse to the case points to this world that Kyozan invites us to take care of, all of us together. Wanchi writes, the emptiness of the circle of the way will not be filled. No worries. The emptiness of the circle of the way will not be filled. The word for circle here also means gem, a kind of jewel in China that forms a circle around a hole. One shining zero. The empty jewel that cannot be filled, but that is itself nothing other than the circle of the way. Dogen calls it continuous practice. Or we could say, the empty jewel that is you. So let's take care and offer ourselves freely to the world, this wide world, and to this practice. Thank you for this shared practice.